The single shot from a Winchester rifle echoed through Evergreen Valley as Nora Phillips squinted through the afternoon sun, watching the trespasser on her land freeze in his tracks. At 22, she'd been running the Phillips ranch alone for nearly 3 years since her father's passing, and no dust-covered stranger was going to intimidate her, no matter how tall he stood in the saddle. "That was a warning," she called out, her voice carrying across the open field. "State your business or the next one won't miss." The man slowly raised his hands, his face obscured beneath the wide brim of his hat. "Just passing through, madam," he called back. "Looking for work." Nora kept her rifle steady. Spring of 1878 had brought more than its share of drifters to Colorado territory, many with less than honorable intentions. "There's nothing for you here. Garrison's got a cattle operation 10 miles east." The stranger dismounted with easy grace, still keeping his hands visible. As he stepped forward, the setting sun cast his features in sharp relief, strong jawline, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a face that stirred something unexpected in Nora's memory. "Name's Jack O'Malley," he said, removing his hat. "And I think you might remember me, Miss Phillips." Nora's rifle lowered a fraction as recognition dawned. Jack O'Malley, the blacksmith's apprentice from town. Her mind raced back 5 years to when they were both younger, before the war had taken so many of the territory's men, before her father's heart had given out, leaving her to manage everything alone. "The same," he replied with a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. They were older now, she a woman of 22, he perhaps 25 or 26. The boy she'd known had been replaced by a man weathered by experiences she could only guess at. "You've been gone a long while," she said, finally lowering her rifle completely. 5 years next month." He dusted off his hat against his leg. "Promised someone I'd come back." Nora remembered suddenly that summer night before he'd left to find his fortune, the night they'd sat on her father's porch watching shooting stars streak across the sky. The night he'd made a promise she'd long since convinced herself he'd forgotten. "You said you'd come back when the stars fell," she said softly, the memory washing over her. "I didn't think you meant it." Jack's smile grew warmer. "A man's only as good as his word, Miss Phillips. And I've always kept mine." Nora studied him, this ghost from her past standing solid and real before her. "Well, Mr. O'Malley, you're about 5 years too late. I've got a ranch to run and no time for." She hesitated, unsure how to name what had once sparked between them. "No time for catching up." "I understand," he said, replacing his hat. "But I heard in town that you might be hiring hands for the season. I've worked cattle drives from Texas to Montana. I can break horses better than most, and I still remember everything your father taught me about ranching." The mention of her father softened Nora's resolve slightly. She was struggling. Drought had taken half her herd the previous year, and with only old Hank and young Willie to help, she was barely keeping the ranch afloat. "I can't pay much," she warned. "I'm not asking for much," he countered. "Just a fair wage for fair work, and maybe a chance to explain why it took me so long to make good on that promise." Nora sighed, knowing she needed the help more than she needed to protect her pride. "You can stay in the bunkhouse with Hank and Willie. We start at dawn." "Yes, madam," he said, and there was something in his tone, respect perhaps, but something else too, something that made her heart flutter traitorously in her chest. "And Jack," she added as she turned toward the house, "don't think for a minute that whatever was between us still stands. That was a girl's fancy, and I'm not that girl anymore." "No, madam," he agreed, but the look in his eyes as he gathered his horse's reins told her he wasn't convinced. "You're certainly not a girl anymore." The first week was harder than Nora had anticipated. Not the work. Jack proved himself capable and tireless, rising before dawn and working well past dusk. He mended fences, helped with the spring calving, and even fixed the ancient water pump that had been giving her trouble for months. No, the difficulty was in pretending his presence didn't affect her, that she didn't notice the way he moved or the sound of his voice carrying across the pasture. "He's sweet on you," Hank commented one evening as they watched Jack lead his horse to the corral. The old ranch hand had been with her family since before Nora was born, and he didn't mince words. "Don't be ridiculous," Nora replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "He's just making good on an old debt he feels he owes my father." "Hum," Hank murmured, unconvinced. "That why he can't take his eyes off you when you ain't looking." Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He's here to work, and that's all." "If you say so," Hank chuckled. "But that boy didn't ride all the way back here just for a job that pays next to nothing." That night, Nora couldn't sleep. The spring air was warm, and through her open window, she could hear the soft strains of a harmonica coming from the direction of the bunkhouse. The melody was familiar, an old folk song her mother used to sing before consumption had taken her when Nora was just 12. Before she could think better of it, she found herself on the back porch, wrapped in a shawl, listening. The music stopped abruptly when Jack spotted her. "Sorry if I disturbed you," he said, setting the harmonica aside. "You didn't," she assured him. "I've always liked that song." Jack moved to the edge of the bunkhouse porch. In the moonlight, with his sleeves rolled up and his collar open, he looked younger, more like the boy she'd known. "Your mother used to sing it," he recalled. "I remember hearing her when I'd come by with my father to help with the horses." "You remember that?" Nora was surprised. It had been so long ago. Jack nodded. "I remember a lot of things about this place, about you." The silence between them was charged with unspoken words. "Why did you really come back, Jack?" Nora finally asked. "And don't tell me it's just about a promise or a job." He considered her question for a long moment. "I came back because in all the places I've been, I never found anywhere that felt like home, and I guess I wanted to know if this still could." "This place, you mean?" "This place," he agreed, then added more softly, "and you." Nora's breath caught. "You can't just walk back into someone's life after 5 years and expect things to be the same." "I don't," he said. "I know things change, people change, I've changed too, but some things." He trailed off, looking up at the night sky. "Some things stay the same, like the stars, always there, even when you can't see them." Nora followed his gaze upward to the vast expanse dotted with pinpricks of light. "You said you'd come back when the stars fell," she reminded him. "Yet here you are, and the stars are right where they've always been." Jack smiled enigmatically. "The year isn't over yet." Before she could ask what he meant, he bid her good night and disappeared back into the bunkhouse, leaving Nora with more questions than answers and a heart that beat a little faster than before. Days turned into weeks, and spring bloomed fully across Evergreen Valley. The pastures grew lush with new grass, calves strengthened and began to frolic, and the creek that ran through the property gurgled with the last of the snowmelt from the mountains. And despite her best efforts to maintain distance, Nora found herself drawn more and more to Jack. It was in the small moments, the way he'd anticipate her needs before she voiced them, how he'd leave wildflowers on the porch railing without comment, the patient manner in which he taught young Willie to throw a lasso. The boy idolized Jack, following him around like a shadow whenever chores allowed. "Mr. Jack says he's been all the way to California," Willie informed Nora one afternoon as she prepared supper. "Says he saw the ocean stretch out forever, like the sky touching water." "Is that so?" Nora replied, trying to sound only politely interested. "Uh-huh. And he worked on a big cattle ranch in Texas and panned for gold in the Dakotas and even rode with the Pony Express for a spell. The boy's eyes were wide with admiration. But he says nowhere was as pretty as right here. Nora smiled despite herself. Mr. Jack has quite the silver tongue, doesn't he? What's that mean? It means he knows just what to say to make people feel good, she explained. Oh, Willie considered this. But I don't think he's lying. He said the prettiest thing he ever saw was you in your blue dress at the Founders' Day dance before he left. Nora nearly dropped the pot she was holding. He said what? Willie nodded earnestly. Said you looked like springtime itself, and that he's carried that picture in his head everywhere he went. Heat flooded Nora's cheeks. Willie Jameson, don't you have chickens to feed? The boy grinned, seeing he'd caused a stir. Yes, madam, he said, scampering out the door. That evening, when Jack came in for supper with the others, Nora couldn't meet his eyes. She served the stew and biscuits with mechanical movements, acutely aware of his presence at her table. When their fingers brushed as she handed him a plate, the contact sent a jolt through her that was impossible to ignore. Looks delicious, Miss Phillips, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. It's just stew, she replied stiffly. Everything tastes better when you make it. Nora retreated to the kitchen, needing a moment to compose herself. This was dangerous territory. She'd built walls around her heart these past years, focused solely on keeping the ranch running, on honoring her father's legacy. Jack O'Malley threatened to breach those defenses with nothing more than a look or a simple compliment. Later, as she washed up while the men sat on the porch enjoying the cool evening air, Hank came in with the empty coffee pot. That boy's got it bad, he commented, setting the pot on the counter. Don't start, Hank, Nora warned. The old ranch hand shrugged. Just saying what I see, and what I see is a good man who came back for you. Might be worth considering why you're fighting so hard against something that could make you happy. I have responsibilities, Nora said, scrubbing a pot with more force than necessary. This ranch won't run itself. No, but it might run better with a partner than with just a hired hand, Hank pointed out. Your pa would have wanted you to be happy, Nora, not just surviving. After Hank left, Nora stood at the sink, staring out the window at the gathering dusk. In the distance, she could see Jack's silhouette as he walked toward the creek, his stride long and confident. Without allowing herself to think too much about it, she dried her hands, grabbed a shawl, and followed. She found him skipping stones across the water, the last light of day glinting off the creek's surface. He didn't seem surprised when she appeared beside him. My father taught me to skip stones here, she said by way of greeting. I could never get more than 3 bounces. Jack smiled, selecting a flat stone from the bank. Mine taught me too. The trick is in the wrist. He demonstrated, sending the stone dancing across the water 5 times before it sank. Show off, Nora teased, and for a moment it felt like old times before responsibilities and promises and years of absence had complicated everything. Jack handed her a stone. Your turn. Their fingers touched again, and this time Nora didn't pull away immediately. She took the stone, positioned herself, and threw. The stone skipped 4 times before disappearing. Not bad, Jack approved. You've improved. I've had practice, she said. This creek has heard a lot of my thoughts over the years. Jack's expression grew serious. I wish I'd been here to hear some of them too. The honesty in his voice broke something loose inside Nora. Why weren't you? She asked, the question that had haunted her for 5 years finally escaping. You left without a real goodbye, just that promise about the stars, and then nothing. No letters, no word at all. Jack sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. I wanted to write, began 100 letters in my head, But I'd promised myself I wouldn't come back until I had something to offer you, something more than just being a blacksmith's son with empty pockets." "I never cared about that," Nora said softly. "I know," he replied. "That was my pride talking. I thought I'd strike it rich quick. There were stories of men finding fortunes in gold, in cattle, in land. I figured 6 months, maybe a year, and I'd come back a man worthy of asking for your hand." He laughed ruefully. "But life had other plans. The gold didn't pan out. The cattle drive I joined was hit by rustlers. I worked job to job, always thinking the next one would be the one that changed everything." "And now," Nora asked, her heart pounding, "what changed to bring you back?" Jack looked at her directly, his gaze unwavering. "I realized that all the fortune in the world wouldn't mean a thing if you weren't there to share it with. I may not be rich in money, Nora, but these past 5 years made me rich in experience, in determination, in knowing what truly matters." He stepped closer. "And what matters to me is you, always has been." Nora's breath caught. "Jack, you don't need to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I know I have no right to expect your feelings to be the same. 5 years is a long time, and you've built a life here without me. I respect that, but I'm asking for a chance to show you that I'm here to stay this time. If you'll have me." The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't the boy who'd left with dreams too big for his pockets. This was a man who had faced the world and come back knowing his own mind and heart. "I need time," Nora said finally. "To think, to be sure." Jack nodded, understanding in his expression. "Time is something I can give you now. I'm not going anywhere, Nora, not unless you tell me to." As they walked back to the ranch in companionable silence, the first stars appearing overhead, Nora felt something shift inside her, like a door long closed was beginning to open, letting in fresh air and possibility. May turned to June, and the work of the ranch continued unabated. Cattle needed moving to summer pastures, hay needed cutting, and 100 other tasks filled their days from dawn to dusk. Through it all, Jack was steady and reliable, earning not just Nora's grudging respect but that of everyone who worked with him. Word spread through the nearby town of Silverdale that Nora Phillips had a new hand who might be more than just a hired man. Gossip traveled fast in small communities, and soon, Nora found herself fielding curious questions from Mrs. Thornton at the general store and knowing looks from Reverend Davis after Sunday services. "People are talking," she told Jack one Sunday afternoon as they rode back from church, letting their horses walk at a leisurely pace while Hank and Willie rode ahead. "People always talk," he replied with a shrug. "Does it bother you?" Nora considered the question. Once it might have. She'd worked hard to be taken seriously as a woman running a ranch on her own, to prove she didn't need a man to succeed. But now, "Not as much as I thought it would," she admitted. Jack smiled, the expression warming his eyes. "That's something, I suppose." They rode in silence for a moment, the summer sun high overhead, the scent of wildflowers heavy in the air. "Tell me about California," Nora said suddenly. "Is the ocean really as vast as they say?" Jack's face lit up at the memory. "Vaster. It stretches beyond where your eyes can see, blue meeting blue at the horizon, and it's never still, always moving, breathing almost, with waves that crash against the shore like thunder." His description painted such a vivid picture that Nora could almost see it. "I've never been further than Denver," she confessed. "Sometimes I wonder what else is out there." "A whole world," Jack said. "Mountains higher than you can imagine, deserts that stretch for days, cities with buildings that touch the clouds." He glanced at her. "I'd show it all to you if you wanted to see it." The offer hung between them, tantalizing and a little frightening. "This ranch is my responsibility," she reminded him, though the words lacked their usual conviction. Responsibilities can be shared, he suggested carefully. Before Nora could respond, they crested the hill that overlooked her ranch, with its weathered buildings, grazing cattle, and the creek winding like a silver ribbon through the property. It wasn't grand or fancy, but it was home, built by her father's hands and maintained by her own. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said, her chest swelling with pride. Jack followed her gaze. "The most beautiful place I've ever seen," he agreed, but when Nora turned, she found he wasn't looking at the ranch at all. He was looking at her. The days grew longer and hotter as summer settled over Evergreen Valley. One particularly scorching afternoon in late June, Nora suggested they take a break from mending fences to cool off in the swimming hole. A deep, clear pool formed where the creek widened, before continuing down through the property. "I haven't been swimming in years," Jack admitted as they tied their horses to a nearby tree. "Then you're overdue," Nora replied, pulling off her boots. She was wearing a simple work shirt and trousers, practical clothes for ranch work that she'd adopted after her father died. Despite the raised eyebrows in town, Jack hesitated, suddenly looking uncertain. "Perhaps I should just watch." "Don't be ridiculous," she interrupted. "It's nearly 90 degrees and we've been working since dawn. Besides, I've seen you swimming before, remember, when we were younger." "That was different," he muttered, but he removed his boots and hat nonetheless. Nora didn't wait for him to change his mind. She waded into the cool water, sighing with relief as it rose to her waist, soaking her clothes but providing blessed respite from the heat. "Come on, O'Malley," she called, splashing water in his direction. "Don't tell me you're afraid of a little creek." That was enough to spur him into action. Jack rolled up his pant legs and waded in, his expression changing from reluctance to pleasure as the cool water enveloped him. "I'd forgotten how good this feels," he admitted, ducking his head under and emerging with water streaming from his hair. They swam and splashed like children, the years and complications falling away in the simple joy of play. When they finally tired, they sat on the grassy bank, letting the sun dry their clothes, talking of everything and nothing, memories from their youth, stories of Jack's travels, plans for the ranch's future. "I've been thinking about expanding," Nora said, picking a wildflower and twirling it between her fingers. "Maybe adding sheep. There's good money in wool and they could graze the upper pastures that are too rocky for cattle." Jack nodded thoughtfully. "It's a sound idea. Diversifying is smart, especially after that drought last year." "That's what I was thinking," Nora agreed, pleased that he understood. Most men would have dismissed such a plan coming from a woman, but Jack treated her ideas with respect. The initial investment would be significant, though. "I might be able to help with that," Jack said hesitantly. Nora looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. "I wasn't entirely unsuccessful in my travels," he explained, opening the pouch to reveal several small but unmistakable gold nuggets. "Found these in a creek bed up in the Dakotas. Not enough to make me rich, but enough to make a difference, maybe." Nora stared at the gold, then at Jack. "You've been carrying these around all this time," he shrugged. "Was saving them for something important. Can't think of anything more important than helping secure the future of this ranch." He paused, then added softly, "Our future, if you'll have me." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Nora felt her heart begin to race. "Jack, are you—" "I'm not formally asking," he clarified quickly. "Not yet, but I want you to know that's where my mind is, where my heart is. Has been since I came back, since before, if I'm honest." Nora looked down at the wildflower in her hands, suddenly understanding the crossroads before her. She could continue as she had been, independent, self-sufficient, alone, or she could take a chance on this man who had left but had also returned, who offered partnership rather than dominance. "I need to be sure," she said finally, meeting his gaze. "Not just of you, but of myself, of what I want." Jack nodded, returning the gold to his pocket. "I understand, and I'll wait, Nora, as long as it takes." As they rode back to the ranch, side by side in comfortable silence, Nora realized with a start that she was happy, truly happy for the first time in years. The knowledge was as refreshing as the cool creek water had been, washing away doubts she hadn't even known she was harboring. July arrived with a spectacular thunderstorm that rattled windows and sent cattle huddling under the shelter of trees. Nora stood on the porch, watching lightning fork across the sky, illuminating the valley in brief, brilliant flashes. "Magnificent, isn't it?" Jack said, joining her. "Always loved a good storm," she agreed. "My father used to say it was the sky reminding us of its power." "Wise man, your father." Jack leaned against the railing, his shoulder nearly touching hers. "He taught me more about horses in a summer than my own father had in a lifetime." "He was good with horses," Nora said, smiling at the memory. "And people too. He could raid them, know what they needed almost before they did." Thunder rolled across the valley, and Jack moved imperceptibly closer. "What do you need, Nora?" he asked, his voice almost lost in the storm's rumble. The question caught her off guard. For so long she'd focused only on what the ranch needed, what her father would have wanted, what was practical and necessary. What did she need for herself? "I don't know," she admitted, the storm's wildness giving her courage for honesty. "I've been so busy taking care of everything else, I haven't thought much about what I want." "Maybe it's time you did," Jack suggested gently. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his face, the strong lines, the kind eyes, the mouth that had begun to feature in her dreams. In that moment of clarity, Nora knew what she wanted, what she needed. Without giving herself time to reconsider, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, then grew more certain as Jack responded, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with exquisite tenderness. When they parted, the storm seemed to have moved closer, the air charged with electricity that had nothing to do with the lightning. "I've been wanting to do that since I came back," Jack confessed, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "What took you so long?" Nora asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Jack smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I was waiting for a sign that you wanted it too. And now I'm wondering if I might kiss you again," he said, his eyes searching hers for permission. Nora's answer was to rise on her toes and meet his lips with hers, this kiss deeper, more certain than the first. Jack's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the storm raged around them, unnoticed. When they finally separated, both a little breathless, Nora felt as though something fundamental had shifted, like the earth itself had moved beneath her feet, rearranging everything she thought she knew. "I should go in," she said reluctantly, aware of propriety despite the isolation of the ranch. Jack nodded, though his eyes said he'd rather she stayed. "Sweet dreams, Nora Phillips," he said, brushing one final, feather-light kiss across her forehead. That night, as the storm gradually subsided, Nora lay awake, replaying the kiss in her mind, wondering what her father would think of Jack O'Malley now. She believed he would approve. Jack was hardworking, honest, and treated her as an equal, not as something delicate to be protected or managed. More importantly, she realized, she approved. The walls she'd built around her heart had crumbled, and she found she didn't mind at all. The next morning dawned clear and fresh, the storm having washed the world clean. Nora rose early, humming as she prepared breakfast, her spirits lighter than they had been in years. "Someone's in a good mood," Hank observed as he came in from feeding the chickens. Nora smiled, not bothering to hide her happiness. "It's a beautiful day." "Hum," the old ranch hand murmured knowingly. "Wouldn't have anything to do with a certain cowboy who can't take his eyes off you, would it?" Before Nora could respond, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Sheriff Daniels, his expression grim beneath his mustache. "Morning, Miss Phillips," he said, removing his hat. "Afraid I've got some troubling news. Jasper Blackwood's been released from territorial prison. Word is he was spotted heading this way yesterday." Nora felt the blood drain from her face. Jasper Blackwood had been her father's business partner until he was caught embezzling money and rustling cattle. Her father's testimony had sent him to prison 3 years ago, just months before his death. "I thought he had 5 more years to serve," she said, gripping the doorframe for support. "Good behavior," the sheriff replied, his tone making it clear what he thought of that. "Just wanted to give you a warning. Blackwood made some threats when he was sentenced, said he'd make the Phillips family pay." "Thank you, Sheriff," Nora managed, her earlier happiness evaporating like morning mist. After the sheriff left, she sank into a chair at the kitchen table, her mind racing. Blackwood was a dangerous man, vindictive and cruel. And with her father gone, his vengeance would fall squarely on her shoulders. "What's wrong?" Jack asked, entering from the back door, immediately sensing her distress. Nora explained the situation, watching Jack's expression harden as she spoke. "He won't touch you," Jack promised, his voice low and fierce. "Not while I'm here." "You don't know Blackwood," Nora said. "He's ruthless and he holds grudges. My father always said he was a man who'd burn down his own house to spite a neighbor." "Then we'll be ready for him," Jack stated firmly. "We'll increase patrols of the property, keep the men in pairs, make sure you're never alone." His decisiveness was reassuring, but Nora couldn't shake the cold dread that had settled in her stomach. Blackwood's return cast a shadow over everything, including the newfound joy she'd discovered in Jack's arms. The next week passed in a state of heightened vigilance. Jack organized the ranch hands into shifts, ensuring someone was always watching the approaches to the property. He moved his things from the bunkhouse to the barn, closer to the main house, in case trouble came in the night. Despite the precautions, there was no sign of Blackwood. Nora began to hope that perhaps he'd moved on, found some other target for his bitterness. But that hope was shattered one morning when she went to check on the horses and found the stable door ajar. Inside, written on the wall in what looked disturbingly like blood, was a message. "I haven't forgotten." Nora stumbled backward, colliding with Jack, who had followed her to the stables. "Stay here," he ordered, drawing his revolver and checking the rest of the stable. Finding it empty, he returned to examine the message. "Animal blood," he determined after a closer look, "probably from a rabbit or squirrel." "He was here, Jack," Nora said, her voice shaking. "On our property close to the house, while we were sleeping." Jack's jaw tightened. "I'll ride into town, let the sheriff know, and when I get back, I'm not letting you out of my sight." True to his word, Jack stayed close to Nora after returning from town. They went about their ranch duties together, Jack's eyes constantly scanning the horizon, his hand never far from his gun. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jack broke the comfortable silence between them. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice serious. "Maybe you should consider leaving for a while, staying with relatives in Denver or somewhere further away just until Blackwood is caught." Nora shook her head firmly. "I won't be driven from my home. This ranch is all I have left of my father. I won't abandon it out of fear." Jack sighed, clearly having anticipated her response. "I figured you'd say that." Stubborn as the day is long, Nora Phillips. Despite the tension of the situation, Nora smiled. "You wouldn't have me any other way." "No," he agreed, taking her hand in his. "I wouldn't." but I need you to promise me something. If things get worse, if there's real danger, you'll consider it. Your father built this place, but he wouldn't want you risking your life for it." Nora squeezed his hand, touched by his concern. "I promise to be careful, but this is my home, Jack." "Our home if—" She hesitated, then continued, "If that's still what you want." Jack's expression softened. "It's all I want, you, this ranch, a future together. And I won't let anyone threaten that, especially not a snake like Blackwood." As July wore on, the threat of Blackwood hung over the ranch like a storm cloud, but no further incidents occurred. The sheriff organized regular patrols, and neighboring ranchers who had no love for Blackwood themselves kept watch on their properties, ready to sound the alarm if he appeared. Gradually, life began to resume its normal rhythms. Nora and Jack continued working side by side, their relationship deepening with each passing day. In quiet moments, they shared dreams of the future, expanding the ranch, perhaps adding an orchard, maybe someday building a bigger house where children could run and play. "You ever miss it?" Nora asked one evening as they walked along the creek. The traveling, seeing new places, the freedom of the open road. Jack considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss certain places, the Pacific Ocean, the redwood forests, but not the traveling itself, not anymore." He looked at her, his expression earnest. "I spent 5 years searching for something I'd already found right here. Just took me a while to realize it." Nora felt warmth bloom in her chest at his words. "And what was that?" "Home," he said simply. "Not just a place, but a feeling, belonging, purpose." He brought her hand to his lips. "Love." The word hung between them, spoken aloud for the first time, though it had been growing evident in actions and glances for weeks. "Love," Nora repeated softly, testing the word, finding it fit perfectly. "Yes, I suppose that's what this is." Jack smiled, drawing her into his arms. "You suppose?" Nora laughed, resting her head against his chest. "I know," she amended. "I love you, Jack O'Malley. Probably have since I was 17, though I tried very hard not to for a while there." "I noticed," he teased, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And I love you, Nora Phillips. Never stopped, not even when I was too proud and foolish to come back and tell you so." Their lips met in a kiss that sealed the declaration, sweet and sure and full of promise. When they parted, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "The Perseid meteor shower will be starting soon," Jack said, looking up at the emerging stars. "Should peak around the middle of August, if I remember right." "The stars falling," Nora murmured, remembering his promise from years ago. Jack nodded. "I always planned to come back for it." "Seems fitting somehow." "Well, you're early," she pointed out. "It's only the end of July." "Couldn't wait any longer," he admitted with a grin. "But I'm glad I'll be here to see it with you. When I was away, I used to look up at the night sky and wonder if you were looking at the same stars, thinking of me." "Sometimes I was," Nora confessed. "Other times I was thinking what a fool you were for leaving." Jack laughed, the sound rich and warm in the gathering dusk. "Fair enough. I was a fool, but I like to think I'm a wiser man now." "We'll see," Nora teased. "The jury's still out on that one." As they walked back to the ranch, hand in hand beneath the stars, Nora felt a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into place. The threat of Blackwood still loomed, but in this moment, with Jack beside her, the future seemed bright with possibility. The first day of August brought scorching heat and news that Blackwood had been spotted 30 miles south, heading away from Evergreen Valley. The sheriff rode out personally to deliver the information, his relief evident. "Looks like he thought better of coming after you," he told Nora. "Word is he's heading for New Mexico territory. Got family down that way." The news lifted a weight from Nora's shoulders. She thanked the sheriff, then hurried to find Jack, who was repairing a wheel on the wagon. "Blackwood's gone south," she announced, unable to keep the relief from her voice. Jack straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "You sure?" Sheriff just brought the news. Said he was spotted heading for New Mexico. Jack's tense expression relaxed slightly. "That's good news if it's true, but we'll stay vigilant a while longer just to be safe." Despite his caution, the atmosphere at the ranch lightened considerably. That evening, Nora suggested they have a small celebration, nothing extravagant. Just a special dinner with Hank, Willie, and the other two hands they'd hired for the summer season. The meal was simple but abundant: roast chicken, fresh vegetables from Nora's garden, and apple pie for dessert. They ate at the long table on the porch, enjoying the cooler air as the sun set. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon music filled the evening, feet tapping in time to lively reels and jigs. "Dance with me?" Jack asked, extending his hand to Nora as Hank launched into a waltz. She hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. Jack led her into the yard, where the packed earth served as a makeshift dance floor. His hand at her waist was warm and steady as he guided her through the steps, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've wanted to dance with you again since that Founder's Day," he admitted as they moved together beneath the stars. "You wore that blue dress with the lace collar, and I thought you were the prettiest girl I'd ever seen." "I still have that dress," Nora said, surprised by the admission. "Haven't had occasion to wear it in years, though." "Maybe you will soon," Jack suggested, a mysterious smile playing at his lips. Before Nora could ask what he meant, the music changed to a faster tune, and they were swept up in a lively reel that left no breath for conversation. Later, as the celebration wound down and the ranch hands drifted off to the bunkhouse, Jack lingered on the porch with Nora. "Thank you for tonight," he said, leaning against the railing beside her. "It's good to see you happy." "I am happy," she realized aloud. "Despite everything, or maybe because of it, having you here." She trailed off, uncertain how to express the fullness in her heart. Jack seemed to understand anyway. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. "I've been waiting for the right moment to give you this," he said, holding out his closed fist. "Maybe tonight is it." Nora extended her palm, and Jack placed the object in her hand, a small, carved wooden horse, delicately detailed and polished to a soft glow. "I made this while I was away," he explained. "Carried it with me everywhere, a reminder of home, of you." Nora turned the carving over in her hands, touched by the craftsmanship and the sentiment behind it. "It's beautiful, Jack." "Not as beautiful as what I'm looking at right now," he said softly, his gaze intent on her face. The moment stretched between them, charged with emotion. Then Jack leaned forward, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of longing, of belonging, of a future unfolding before them. When they finally parted, breathless and a little dazed, Jack pressed his forehead to hers. "I should go," he murmured, though he made no move to leave. "Or you could stay," Nora suggested, her heart pounding with the boldness of her invitation. Jack drew back slightly, searching her face. "Nora, are you sure? Your reputation, my reputation, is already the subject of town gossip," she interrupted with a small smile. "And I find I care less and less what others think. I know what I want, Jack. I want you here with me." The certainty in her voice seemed to convince him. Jack nodded, taking her hand and letting her lead him inside, closing the door on the star-filled night and opening the door to a new chapter in their lives. Dawn found them tangled in each other's arms, the early light filtering through the curtains to paint patterns on the quilt. Nora woke first, watching Jack's peaceful face in sleep, memorizing the lines and contours that were becoming as familiar to her as her own. When his eyes finally fluttered open, the smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice husky with sleep. "Good morning," Nora replied, feeling shy suddenly despite the intimacy they'd shared. Jack reached out to trace the curve of her cheek. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Not yet," she said, smiling. "Well, I do. More than I have words to say." The sincerity in his voice warmed her from the inside out. "I love you too," she whispered, the words still new enough to feel momentous each time she spoke them. They lingered in bed longer than was practical, sharing whispered conversations and gentle touches, reluctant to break the spell of their newfound closeness. Eventually, though, the responsibilities of the ranch called them back to reality. As they dressed, Jack paused, looking thoughtful. "Nora, I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" she asked, pinning up her hair. "I'd like to make this official. Proper." He came to stand before her, taking both her hands in his. "I don't have a ring yet, but I'm asking anyway. Nora Phillips, will you marry me?" Though she'd known the question was coming, had felt it building between them for weeks, the actual moment still took her breath away. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will." Jack's face lit up with joy, and he lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace, spinning her around until they were both laughing like children. "We could ride into town today, speak to Reverend Davis," Jack suggested when he finally set her down. "Start making arrangements." Nora nodded, happiness bubbling up inside her like a spring. "I'd like that." They decided to tell Hank and Willie first over breakfast. The old ranch hand's weathered face split into a wide grin at the news. "About time," he declared. "Been watching you two circle each other for months like a pair of cautious cats." Willie, now 12 but still full of boyish enthusiasm, was equally delighted. "Does this mean Mr. Jack will be staying forever?" he asked. "That's the plan," Jack confirmed, his arm around Nora's shoulders. "If you'll all have me." "Course we will," Hank said firmly. "You're family now." The word family resonated deeply with Nora. For so long it had been just her, carrying the weight of the ranch and her father's legacy alone. Now, somehow, she'd found herself at the center of this small but vital community. Hank, who'd been like a second father. Willie, who'd come to them orphaned and scared 3 years ago. The seasonal hands who returned year after year. And now Jack, who would be her husband, her partner in all things. They rode into town after breakfast, the summer sun warm on their backs. Silverdale was bustling with its usual Monday morning activity, merchants unloading supplies, townspeople shopping and gossiping, children darting between buildings in games of tag. Reverend Davis welcomed them into the small church with a knowing smile. "I've been expecting you too," he admitted after they shared their news. "Been praying for it, truth be told. It does my heart good to see young love flourish." They set the date for August 12th, the peak of the Perseid meteor shower, as Jack had suggested. "Seems fitting," he explained when the Reverend raised an eyebrow at the specificity of the date. "A promise I made a long time ago." As they left the church, plans made and hearts full, Nora felt as though she were walking on air. They visited the general store to order supplies for the wedding feast, then stopped at the dressmaker's so Nora could arrange to have her blue dress altered for the occasion. "It won't be fancy," she said as they rode home, suddenly worried that Jack might have wanted something more elaborate. "Just family and friends here at the ranch." "It will be perfect," Jack assured her, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "All I want is you, Nora. The rest is just details." The days leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of preparation. Nora cleaned the house from top to bottom, aired out linens, and baked enough to feed an army. Jack, with help from the other men, built a large table for the wedding feast and strung lanterns in the trees around the yard. 3 days before the wedding, A letter arrived from Denver. The bank had approved their loan for the sheep Nora had been wanting to add to the ranch. She and Jack had applied jointly, their combined assets and Jack's gold nuggets providing the collateral needed. "It's really happening," Nora said, clutching the approval letter. "Our plans, our future, it's all falling into place." Jack pulled her into an embrace. "Did you doubt it would?" "Part of me did," she admitted. "After my father died, I got used to expecting the worst, safer that way. And now—" Nora smiled up at him. "Now I'm learning to expect the best. It's scarier somehow, but better too." The night before their wedding, as tradition dictated, Jack moved back to the bunkhouse. "Bad luck to see the bride before the ceremony," Hank reminded him when Jack lingered at the main house after supper. "Since when are you superstitious?" Jack protested. "Since always," the old ranch hand replied firmly. "Now go on. You've got the rest of your lives to be together. One night apart won't kill you." Reluctantly, Jack bid Nora good night with a lingering kiss. "Until tomorrow," he murmured against her lips. "Until tomorrow," she echoed, already counting the hours. Sleep proved elusive that night. Nora tossed and turned, her mind too full of excitement and anticipation to settle. Around midnight, she gave up and moved to the window seat, gazing out at the star-filled sky. A movement near the barn caught her eye, a shadow moving where no shadow should be. Nora leaned forward, straining to see in the darkness. For a moment, she thought she glimpsed a figure slipping between buildings, but then it was gone, and she wondered if her eyes were playing tricks on her. Just to be safe, she retrieved her father's old revolver from the bedside drawer and placed it within easy reach, before finally drifting into an uneasy sleep. Dawn broke clear and bright on August 12th, 1878, Nora and Jack's wedding day. Nora woke to the sound of birds singing outside her window and the distant lowing of cattle in the pasture. For a moment she lay still, savoring the knowledge that by sunset she would be Mrs. Jack O'Malley. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. "Miss Nora," came Willie's voice. "Miss Clara's here to help you get ready." Clara Jenkins, the dressmaker from town and one of Nora's few close friends, had volunteered to help her prepare for the ceremony. Nora called for Willie to send her in, then quickly rose to wash her face and brush her hair. "Oh, look at you," Clara exclaimed as she entered, arms full of packages. "Practically glowing already, and we haven't even started." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Clara helped Nora into her blue dress, now altered and embellished with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. She arranged Nora's hair in an elegant updo, adorned with small white flowers from the garden. "Something borrowed," Clara said, fastening a pearl necklace around Nora's throat. "These were my mother's." "They're beautiful," Nora said, touching the pearls gently. "Thank you." "Something blue is easy," Clara continued with a smile, gesturing to the dress. "And something old." She handed Nora a handkerchief edged with intricate embroidery. "This belonged to your mother. Your father gave it to me for safekeeping years ago, asked me to give it to you on your wedding day." Tears sprang to Nora's eyes. "He did," Clara nodded, her own eyes misting. "He always believed you'd find happiness, Nora. He'd be so proud today." Nora carefully tucked the handkerchief into her sleeve, blinking back tears. "And something new." "That's Jack's department, I believe," Clara said with a wink. "Now let's get you downstairs. Your groom will be arriving any minute." The main room of the house had been transformed. Flowers adorned every surface, their scent filling the air with sweetness. Through the window, Nora could see the yard, where chairs had been arranged in rows facing a simple arch constructed of twisted branches and more flowers. Guests were already arriving, neighbors, townsfolk, friends who'd supported Nora through the difficult years after her father's death. Each arrival brought gifts and well wishes, exclaiming over how beautiful the bride looked and how lucky Jack was. Hank appeared at her side, dressed in his Sunday best, his silver hair slicked back. "Your father should be the one to do this," he said gruffly. "But since he can't, I'd be honored to walk you down the aisle if you'll have me." Nora took his arm, throat tight with emotion. "I can't think of anyone better," she managed. Outside, Reverend Davis had taken his place beneath the arch. Guests were seated, a hushed anticipation falling over the gathering. And there, waiting for her, stood Jack, clean-shaven, hair neatly combed, dressed in a new suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and tall frame. The moment he saw her, his face transformed with such naked adoration that Nora felt her breath catch. This was real. This was happening. After years of loneliness and responsibility of building walls around her heart, she was choosing love, choosing partnership, choosing Jack. With Hank at her side, Nora began the short walk to her future. Each step felt momentous, carrying her away from the solitary life she'd known and toward something new and wonderful, and a little frightening in its vastness. When she reached Jack, he took her hands in his eyes never leaving her face. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered for her ears alone. Reverend Davis began the ceremony, his voice carrying across the yard as he spoke of love and commitment, of the sacred bond of marriage. Nora heard the words as if from a distance, her focus entirely on Jack, on the warmth of his hands holding hers, on the love shining in his eyes. When it came time for the vows, Jack's voice was steady and sure. "I, Jack O'Malley, take you, Nora Phillips, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love, honor, and cherish you in sickness and in health, in good times and bad, for as long as we both shall live." Nora repeated the words, her voice growing stronger with each promise. This felt right, felt true in a way few things in her life ever had. "The rings, please," Reverend Davis prompted. Jack reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "Something new," he said softly, echoing Clara's earlier words. "Though my love for you is anything but new." As he slid the ring onto her finger, Nora felt a sense of completion, of coming home. She placed a matching band on Jack's hand, marveling at how right it looked there. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Davis proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Jack drew her close, one hand cradling her face as he bent to press his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle yet profound, a seal on their promises and a beginning of their shared life. When they parted, the assembled guests erupted in cheers and applause. "Mrs. O'Malley," Jack murmured, his forehead pressed to hers. "Mr. O'Malley," Nora returned, unable to keep from smiling. The celebration that followed was everything Nora had hoped for, joyous, intimate, filled with laughter and music. They feasted under the open sky as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Toasts were made, stories shared, and through it all, Jack remained at her side, his hand often finding hers as if he couldn't bear to be disconnected from her for long. As twilight deepened into dusk, the guests gradually departed, leaving only the ranch family, Hank, Willie, and the other hands to help clean up. Jack and Nora thanked them for their help, then sent them off to the bunkhouse with the remaining cake and a bottle of whiskey to continue their own celebration. Finally alone, Jack led Nora to a blanket he'd spread on a small hill overlooking the ranch. "The meteor shower should be starting soon," he explained, settling beside her. "I wanted us to watch it together." Nora leaned against him, content beyond words. The night air was warm, fragrant with summer flowers and alive with the sounds of crickets and the distant murmur of the creek. "Happy?" Jack asked, his arm around her shoulders. "More than I ever thought possible," she admitted. It still feels like a dream sometimes. If it is, I hope we never wake up, he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged one by one, painting the sky with their ancient light. Then, just as Jack had predicted, the first meteor streaked across the heavens, a brilliant flash of silver against the velvet darkness. "Make a wish," Jack whispered as another star fell, then another. Nora watched the celestial display, her heart so full she could hardly contain it. "I don't need to," she said, turning to face her husband. "Everything I could wish for is right here." Jack's expression softened with tenderness. "I promised I'd come back when the stars fell," he reminded her. "Some promises take time, but I always intended to keep that one." "I believe you," Nora said, and she did completely and without reservation. "And I'm making you a new promise now. Whatever comes, whatever challenges we face them together. No more running, no more walls between us." "Together," Jack agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss as more stars fell around them, blessing their union with celestial fire. Later, much later, as they lay entwined in what was now their bed, in what was now their home, Nora found herself thinking of all the twists and turns that had led to this moment. The lonely years, the hard work, the fear and doubt, all of it had been part of the journey that brought Jack back to her, that taught her to open her heart again. "What are you thinking about?" Jack asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Everything," she replied honestly. "How different my life is now than I imagined it would be. How glad I am for that difference." Jack propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with an expression that made her heart skip. "I have something to confess," he said. "What's that?" "I've been thinking about the name for our ranch. Phillips Ranch was your father's legacy, and we'll honor that. But I was thinking, maybe we could call our new sheep operation Starfall Farm." His eyes twinkled. "Since that's what brought us together in the end." Nora smiled up at him, touched by the sentiment. "I think that's perfect. Starfall Farm it is." Jack's answering smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I love you, Nora O'Malley, more than all the stars in the sky." "I love you too, Jack O'Malley," she whispered, drawing him down for another kiss. "More than all the stars that fall." As they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, Nora felt a sense of perfect peace. Outside, the meteor shower continued, stars falling like blessings on the small ranch house where two people had found their way back to each other against all odds, guided by a promise made beneath those same stars 5 years before. 5 years later, on a warm August night in 1883, Nora sat on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching her 3-year-old daughter chase fireflies in the yard. Elizabeth Grace O'Malley had her father's storm-gray eyes and her mother's determination, a combination that kept Nora and Jack on their toes from sunup to sundown. "Mama, look," Elizabeth called, cupping her hands around a captured firefly. "I caught a star." "So you did," Nora agreed, smiling at her daughter's delight. "But remember, we have to let stars go so they can keep shining." Elizabeth nodded solemnly and opened her hands, watching the firefly rise and blink away into the gathering dusk. "Like the falling stars Daddy promised." "Just like that," Nora confirmed, always amazed at how much the child absorbed and remembered. Jack had been telling Elizabeth the story of his promise since she was old enough to understand words, and it had become her favorite bedtime tale. The sound of hoofbeats announced Jack's return from checking the sheep in the north pasture. Starfall Farm had grown from a modest flock to one of the most successful wool operations in the territory, complementing the cattle ranch perfectly just as Nora had envisioned. "Daddy." Elizabeth squealed, abandoning her firefly hunt to race toward her father as he dismounted. Jack scooped her up with practiced ease, swinging her high before settling her on his hip. "How's my little star today?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her curls. "I caught a falling star, but I let it go," she informed him seriously. "That was very wise of you," Jack approved, carrying her toward the porch. When he reached Nora, he bent to kiss her, his free arm sliding around her expanding waistline. "And how are you feeling?" "Better now that you're home," Nora replied truthfully. This second pregnancy had been easier than the first, but she still missed Jack fiercely whenever he was away from the ranch, even for a few hours. Jack settled beside her on the porch swing, Elizabeth nestled between them. "The sheep are doing well," he reported. "That new ram was worth every penny." "I told you he would be," Nora reminded him with a smile. In the 5 years of their marriage, they'd fallen into a comfortable partnership, each respecting the other's expertise while supporting their joint ventures. The ranch had prospered under their combined care, growing to nearly twice its original size. As darkness fell completely, Hank emerged from the bunkhouse where he now had a private room, having semi-retired from ranch work, but unwilling to leave the place that had been his home for decades. Willie, now 17 and nearly a man, walked beside him, deep in conversation about the new breeding horses they'd acquired. "Evening, folks," Hank called, waving as he and Willie approached. "How's our little lady tonight, catching stars?" Elizabeth informed him proudly. "Is that so?" Hank chuckled, lowering himself carefully onto a porch chair. "Well, I reckon we might see some real falling stars tonight if the almanac is right. Perseids showers do." Jack's arm tightened around Nora's shoulders. "Our anniversary," he murmured for her ears alone. 5 years. "The best 5 years of my life," she replied softly. After a simple but satisfying supper, they all returned to the porch to watch for meteors. Willie brought his guitar, playing quiet tunes as they waited for the celestial show to begin. Elizabeth fought sleep valiantly, determined to see the falling stars her parents had promised, but eventually succumbed, curled in Jack's lap with her thumb in her mouth. "I'll put her to bed," Nora offered, but Jack shook his head. "Let her stay," he said. "Even if she's sleeping, I want her to be part of this." Nora understood. These gatherings, family together under the stars, had become sacred to them, a tradition that marked the rhythm of their lives together. The first meteor appeared just after 9, a brilliant streak across the northern sky. Others followed, some faint, some dazzlingly bright, painting silver tracks against the darkness. "Never gets old, does it?" Jack mused, his eyes reflecting the light of the falling stars. "Never," Nora agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "I think about that night sometimes, our wedding night, watching the meteors. How perfect it felt, how right." "Still feels that way," Jack said, his hand finding hers. "Every day with you feels right, Nora, even the hard ones." And there had been hard days, the winter blizzard that claimed a quarter of their herd. The spring when Elizabeth had fallen ill with fever and they'd feared for her life. The time Jack had been thrown from a horse and broken his leg so badly they'd worried he might never walk properly again. But through it all, they'd kept their promise to face life together, supporting each other through the difficulties and celebrating the joys: Elizabeth's birth, the expansion of the ranch, the respect they'd earned in the community. "You ever regret it?" Nora asked suddenly. "Settling down here instead of continuing your adventures?" Jack looked at her with surprise. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "Everything I was looking for out there I found right here with you. This is my adventure, Nora, our life together, our family, our legacy." As if to emphasize his point, the baby chose that moment to kick vigorously, causing Nora to place a hand on her belly with a small gasp. "Someone agrees with me," Jack chuckled, covering her hand with his own. "Your son is going to be a troublemaker," Nora predicted with a smile. They didn't know for certain the baby was a boy, but Jack had been convinced from the moment she told him about the pregnancy. Just like his father, Hank interjected with a knowing grin. "I wasn't a troublemaker," Jack protested. "I was adventurous." "That's one word for it," the old ranch hand snorted. "I seem to recall you and Thomas Jenkins nearly burning down the livery stable with those fireworks when you were 15. "That was an accident," Jack defended himself, though his eyes twinkled with remembered mischief. "Hum," Hank mumbled skeptically. Their gentle banter continued as more meteors streaked overhead, a comfortable familiarity born of years of shared lives. Willie eventually excused himself to turn in for the night, and Hank followed not long after, leaving Jack, Nora, and the sleeping Elizabeth alone on the porch. "I have something for you," Jack said after a while, shifting Elizabeth to his other arm as he reached into his pocket. "An anniversary gift." "Jack, we said no gifts this year," Nora protested mildly, though curiosity made her lean forward. "I know, but I couldn't resist." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "Open it." Nora carefully undid the string and unwrapped the paper, revealing a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a pendant, a small silver star on a delicate chain, with a tiny diamond set in its center that caught the moonlight and sparkled. "Jack, it's beautiful," she breathed, lifting it from the box. "I had it made in Denver," he explained, looking pleased by her reaction. "The diamond is small, but the jeweler assured me it was of good quality. I wanted you to have a falling star you could keep." Tears pricked Nora's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Will you put it on me?" Jack nodded, carefully shifting Elizabeth to the porch swing beside him before taking the necklace. Nora turned, lifting her hair so he could fasten the clasp around her neck. His fingers were gentle against her skin, and when he was done, he pressed a kiss to the nape of her neck that sent a shiver down her spine. "Perfect," he murmured as she turned back to face him, the star pendant resting just below her collarbones. "I don't have anything for you," Nora admitted, feeling a twinge of guilt. Jack smiled, gathering Elizabeth back into his arms as the child stirred slightly in her sleep. "You've given me everything I could ever want," he said, his gaze moving from Nora to their daughter to the hand Nora still rested on her pregnant belly. "A family, a home, love. What gift could possibly compare to that?" Nora leaned forward to kiss him, her heart so full of love it felt impossible to contain. "I think I fell in love with you all over again just now," she whispered against his lips. "Good," Jack replied, his smile evident in his voice. "Because I fall in love with you every day, Nora O'Malley, and I plan to keep doing so for the rest of our lives." Above them, another meteor blazed a brilliant path across the sky, a cosmic benediction on a love that had withstood time and distance and doubt to grow into something as enduring as the stars themselves. And in that moment, watching the heavens shower them with celestial fire, Nora knew with absolute certainty that the cowboy who had come back when the stars fell had brought with him everything she'd ever need, a love as constant as the North Star, and as spectacular as the meteors that had sealed their fate.